Welcome to my studio and sandblasting flash glass. This is going to be a multimedia extravaganza, and I have no idea if it's going to work. So bear with me because I'm going to be using the laptop camera, an Okio cam, and also sharing my screen in PowerPoint, which I am going to start now. There's always a gap. Pardon the gap. This is a 100% homemade production. Boy, are you going to find that out this time. All right. Sandblasting flash glass. In this demonstration, I will create 3 pieces of sandblasted glass. One will be simple stage blasting, or simple one-stage blasting, sorry. The second will be stage blasted in a few stages, and the third will be sandblasted with no stages or no stencil to create a surface on which to work on further with other techniques such as painting and engraving. I showed this image in the last video on sandblasters. It shows a piece of red on clear and a piece of blue on clear flash glass with simple sandblasting. In this case, some areas have been sandblasted all the way through to the clear area, which appears as white, and then lightly sandblasted in areas that have cloudy tones, like right here and over here. I have some examples of student work, mostly from University of the Arts students, which showcase sandblasting. This is just done with a simple stencil. And this one is done with Elmer's glue. I'm going to get to all of this in mere moments. Now this part here is something else. It's got paint on it, but these sections here are done with glue. Sandblasting is pretty simple, even when the patterns are complex, and you can put the 2 layers together, which I will talk about in another demonstration later on, and get amazing color effects like this one. So this is these 2 together make this. Another example is this. One of the coolest things about flash glass is that you can use it in stacks. So what you're seeing here is a piece of red on clear on top of a piece of blue on clear with the addition of some yellow, which is silver stain, and that will also be in a later demo. And you can get a full range of color. Here, I will show you some pieces of glass. So here's a piece of blue on clear that's been sandblasted and a piece of red on clear, and you put them together and you get something that looks like that. Doesn't matter what it is. Another example. And yet another example. These are examples of layers. And these are 2 very small pieces. So these are but a few of the wonderful creative things that can be done with flash glass and sandblasting. This technique is ripe for exploration, if you ask me. The sky is the absolute limit. As far as I'm concerned in art, there are no rules. You only have to follow the laws of the land and not harm animals and non-consenting adults. Otherwise, you can do whatever you want. I don't believe in rules in art. So how is flash glass made? First of all, it's often called antique glass. However, it's not antique. It was probably made this year sometime. And it is handmade, as this vintage image shows. There are a few main manufacturers. This is the glass factory Lamberts in Waldsassen, Germany. Note the wooden roof, all that fire and a wooden roof. In German, flash glass is called Überfangglas. Überfangglas actually means overlay glass, but I do have a pair of Überfangs to demonstrate the point. What a terrific word. S.A. Benheim is an importer, the sole exclusive importer of Lambert's flash glass in the United States. Now, they sell wholesale to the trade only, but of course they are selling to retail establishments which can resell it to you, unless of course you are a stained glass artist with a business license. A second company is called Verrerie Saint-Just. They are a division of the huge glass company in France called Saint-Gobain. Saint-Gobain makes windshields and giant panes of glass for skyscrapers and stuff like that. And they sell direct to the public on the internet. Of course, you will be paying to ship this stuff to the United States. You know what? It's not as expensive as you might think. So there is that. There is a company in the United States that manufactures flash glass, and that is Fremont Antique. This is the webpage of Northwest Art Glass, which distributes it. Now, I have been there, and you can go there too. It's in Seattle. It is a one-man operation, although he does work with a team of glassblowers, but he is basically the whole company, Fremont. That's Jim Flanagan, making a large cylinder of glass. Oh, and by the way, there are some fantastic videos that Lambert's has put out of their factory in action blowing sheet glass, which I highly recommend you look up on YouTube because it's pretty cool to watch. So here is a link to a bunch of the sources that I have just mentioned. And of course, at the bottom it says, are you a glass blower? Consider making your own flash glass. So what is sandblasting? It is sending a spray of sand under high pressure out of a gun to remove the flash layer and reveal the base layer of color. Here is a vocabulary note for you. Sandblasting and engraving are not etching. Etching always refers to the use of acid in metals and glass. So when people say it's etched glass, that means they stuck it in a bath of acid. I am not brave enough to use that technique myself. Sandblasting is done to generate patterns like these and the ones in the previous images of student work that I showed you. Sandblasting itself is not something that requires much skill. You will just aim the sandblaster gun and fire away. So these patterns here in this image were created by using various masks, also called resists, and I will describe each one. So this one here is done with contact paper. This one here, and this one here, and this green one here are done by drizzling glue out of a bottle and letting it dry. The ones that look like lace are done by dipping a piece of lace or a paper doily or something of that nature in glue and putting it on the glass and letting it dry. The ones that look like this, the glue was spooged on with a sponge. More vocabulary terms. So those are some of the funky things you can do with sandblasting. However, if you are looking at my work, for instance, and what you are seeking to do is create very detailed tonal images like this, I will say this is not sandblasting. There is sandblasting involved, but it is engraved and filed, and that will be in another demonstration video at another time. It is my belief that complex, detailed imagery and tonal work like this is best done ways other than sandblasting. So in this image, what you're seeing, I had sandblasted the silhouette of the figure, but you wouldn't be able to even see a difference. All of the picture itself was done with engraving tools. So can airbrush and detailed painterly effects be achieved by sandblasting alone? The answer is they do make tiny little sandblasters for dentists with tiny little nozzles. And I think that you could eventually get that effect with sandblasting after years of practice. But I ask you, why? Why would you bother? Why? Sandblasting, it's dirty, it's loud, it's smelly, your back hurts. I hate sandblasting. So my entire studio practice is centered on trying to find ways to sandblast less, not more. But I don't want to stifle your creativity in any way. So if sandblasting is totally your thing, knock yourself out and sandblast. Maybe I'll even hire you to sandblast for me because I don't like it. The sandblasting process frosts the glass, which leaves it with a slightly rough surface. So it can also be done to prepare the surface for detailed work like painting. So you can actually, in these pieces, paint was rubbed into sandblasted areas after it was sandblasted. It won't stick to the clear glass, right? This is glass paint, which fires on. It'll just wipe right off. All right. So let's talk about patterns for a minute. This is a very simple pattern that would be very easy to create in Flash Glass. And looky here, I've actually already done it. You're going to see me do it. It's going to be backwards. Now I understand why filmmaking is such a pain in the neck, because you have to have, or cooking shows, I imagine they have 4 versions of that souffle in various stages that they whip out at various times when the cameraman's there. All right, so this pattern here is very easy to create in Flash Glass. I always work with black and white patterns, but obviously I made it in red and white. So ultimately the piece of glass is red and clear. Be careful when selecting patterns for sandblasting. This is a lovely pattern, but it's pretty complicated to hand cut. Now, weird people like me might be sort of into cutting this out. Take all day, be fun, relaxing. But if you're not into it, this is the kind of thing that can be made with a photo sandblast stencil, which I will talk about in mere moments. This design is sort of in between. What I would say about this is that the small details in the center of the flowers would be done easier with an engraving tool rather than cut out all those little tiny details. So this is a pattern that's appropriate for a piece where you're going to sandblast and engrave. And this pattern is another pattern for this demo to show you how to sandblast in several stages. So I will hand cut the stencil and then blast the areas that appear in the pattern that are white all the way through. And then I will remove the stencil from the gray areas and sandblast those areas a little bit. And then I will remove the whole rest of the mask and sandblast all around it to make a tonal image. And since it's done already for my cooking show, you can see, but I will show you again. Remember, you can always go in later if you are interested in making detailed images and do that with engraving tools. So one last point about patterns. I think sandblasting Flash can get a little confusing in terms of conceiving of what's going to be color and what's going to be white. Your head starts to explode. First of all, I think you should feel free to experiment and see what happens, and don't be too attached to the results when you're a beginner. In fact, don't be too attached to the results when you're an expert either. That is the way. But what I find helps is to think of sandblasting as painting with white spray paint. Remember, when you sandblast, the color is coming off. It's not being applied as a painter would do. You're not painting with blue on a white piece of paper. You are painting with white on a blue piece of paper. So think of yourself as painting with the white instead of the color. This is another pattern that I will sandblast. However, what I will do is I will sandblast a blue piece of glass, and you won't know it's sandblasted because it will just still be blue, but it will have a slight tooth to it. And I will use that in a later demonstration to show you engraving. For detailed work with human faces, I always print my patterns out forward and reverse. Glass, being transparent, can be seen through, so you can check your accuracy both right side up and upside down, which is helpful, but don't worry about that now. That is information for later. And here we have a piece of sandblasted glass, and this is what I imagined that the pattern looked like. So what you see is these little white highlights and these little dots. That was gotten later with an engraving tool. So think in terms of when you're making a pattern of simplifying it so that you're not cutting it out all day long. I have another example. So this design, this was the sandblasting stencil. I have it in reverse because I don't actually know what the stencil looked like, but it was one of these, and then these intricate lace-like patterns were done with an engraving tool later. All right, so what kind of resist do you use? you need some kind of resist to cut the pattern into. A resist is anything that resists the sand. And that, by the way, includes your own flesh. So if the gloves in the sandblast box have holes in them, it's more irritating than painful. It doesn't hurt. Many glass people put forth this as the product you use for sandblasting glass. Well, the big no symbol should tell you what I think of that idea. What I like to use is contact paper clear cover for a couple reasons. Mainly, it's transparent. It has on a white carrier sheet right now, but the plastic itself is transparent, and that means you can see your drawing through it. That's helpful, really helpful. So I also like Contact brand. Contact is a brand. When we call it contact paper, other people are calling it like shelf cover and stuff like that. I like it because it's very reliable. It has enough stickiness that it will stay on the glass and withstand the pressure of the sandblaster. So it is a good product, and it's not that expensive. Here are some examples of glue. You can try different kinds of glue and experiment and see what happens. On the right-hand side is white litho ink. When I taught in Germany once upon a time, we were sandblasting with white litho ink as a resist, which it was a mess to clean off the glass. We had to clean it off with sawdust. But it made beautiful brush strokes that looked almost like you had painted the glass with the color that the flash was. It was pretty intense. I have not tried it since. And here is another example of a student piece. I just want to show you what they've done with these screens. They've actually used different types of screens that they bought at a hardware store, and they either taped it to the glass or they glued it down. I think there was, the reason it's so ethereal looking is because there was a gap. It wasn't flush with the glass. So when they were sandblasting, the sand was kind of going all over the place, and it made this beautiful effect. And of course, there's always photo stencils, which are available from the Resist company. A photo sandblast stencil is it's made much the way you make a silk screen. It's a photographic process. You will need a negative, and which you can kind of make on a printer. You used to be able to make them, but now they don't print dark enough. And you can expose the film yourself. You need the setup, and I will say, and you need the film. I have two reasons why I object to photo stencils, and I don't always teach them. One is it is incredibly cost ineffective to do it. And second, a lot of time I find students want to do this because they want to use art they found on the internet instead of drawing stuff themselves. I don't know how they sleep at night, frankly, because I think you should be using your own art for your own art. And when they tell me they can't draw, I think, well, they'll never learn if they're not doing it. So make your own stencils. All right, thus concludes the part where I talk about stencils and patterns. Now we're going to move on to the glass. So to begin, you're going to apply the stencil to the glass. Here's some glass. It looks like this at the beginning. It's just a sheet of red glass. It doesn't look like it's layered or anything. It just looks like red glass. I have a sheet of blue I can show you as well. Oopsie. One moment, please. Technical difficulties. Here's a sheet of blue. The sheets are about 3 feet by 2 feet, so this is just a chunk of it. And you always hold your glass vertical like this. Okay, it comes in other colors. It comes in actually a huge variety of colors. So it's not just red and blue, but I am working with red and blue. All right, so the first thing you're going to have to do is determine on which side is the color, because you want to apply the resist to that side of the glass. So let's first talk a little bit about light, shall we? This handy graphic demonstrates the difference between reflected light, absorbed light, and transmitted light. Now, when working with stained glass, I highly recommend that your main workspace be a light table. Stained glass is an example of transmitted light. as seen in this image. Because stained glass is transparent, it shines light when a light source such as the sun or a light bulb or a light source of any kind is shining through it. So in order to determine the non-flash side, the clear side or the flash side, it is easiest to look at the glass in a reflected light situation. So I might be on the light table right now, but you want to move away from the light table and stand under a light source. There's a fluorescent light up there. And that will shine light on your glass and you can see it in a reflected surface. Now, I know this may seem super basic, but bear with me here because I think this might be helpful in the long run. This is a diagram of the anatomy of a piece of flash glass. So you have the clear base layer and you have the colored layer. This, by the way, is made when the glass blower is dipping the bubble into a tank full of color. And you put them together. I mean, they are made in the glass blowing process when the glass is molten hot and blown out into sheets ultimately. And this is what the product looks like when it is looked at together. So when you look through the clear side and you're trying to determine on which side is the flash. So here's my piece of glass. And I'm looking at it and I'm sort of moving it around, turning it over. And what I'm doing here is I'm looking for bubbles. Flash glass often has bubbles. For all you glass blowers out there, I know this is weird, but in flash glass, bubbles are considered desirable and they're part of the character of the glass and we love the bubbles. So if you are looking through the clear side, like in this diagram, there is no layer of color obscuring the view of the bubbles, and they should appear sparkly, like in a glass of champagne. Now, if you're looking through the flash side, you will have a harder time seeing the bubbles. Sometimes you can't see them at all anymore. They will sparkle a lot less. And once you get used to this method of determining which is the flash side and which is not the flash side, this is the easiest way. So basically, you just pick up the glass and you flip it and you see the light reflecting on it in different ways and you try to find the bubbles. It's so automatic for me that I just pick up the flash glass and I already know which is the flash side, and this will happen with you too. But what if there are few, or heaven forbid, no bubbles? Then you can look for imperfections on the edge. And I will tell you, there are no imperfections on the edge of this piece of glass. But the two in the PowerPoint definitely have imperfections. This is a chip, and well, these are also chips, but this is called clamshelling, and that's from when you have smoothed the edge on a grinder. It will chip the flash a little bit. That won't show when you assemble the piece, but it is kind of a nuisance. And it's easy to see where the flash is in that case. And finally, you can also try looking right down the spine of the glass like this. Because flash glass, the flash layer of flash glass is always going to be a different thickness because it's handmade. And sometimes you can just see it just sitting there. And that makes it very easy. Okay. So before I switch to live mode and demonstrate, I want to demonstrate the resist applying process and sandblasting. I just want to share with you these tools. On the right here, we have an X-Acto knife, a number 11 X-Acto knife, and I want to make the point that do what you have to. Start a Kickstarter, but buy 100 blades at once. You will never, ever be sorry you did. The more sharp this knife is, the happier you will be. Now with complicated stencils, if it's really involved and you want to hand cut it, you can use a stencil burner. The burning plastic is toxic, so you want to make sure there is an exhaust hood collecting those fumes so that you and anyone else in the room isn't breathing that stuff in. It is nasty smelling. And it's very quick. They look like miniature soldering irons. So there is that. And finally, to put the glass, put the stencil on the glass, I recommend using a firm silicone ceramic rib, maybe one with an edge on it like these, as opposed to this one, but it doesn't really matter. And let's see, I have a few more slides here, which I will show you in mere moments. All right, so I'm going to show you how to apply the resist, and that requires that I switch cameras. So I am going to pause the video, and when I come back, you should be looking at my light table. All right, since we're live, here are my hands. See, I just thought I'd show you these samples again. This one was done with a photoresist. This is a piece of blue on turquoise flash glass, and it's done with glue and lace. This is the demo, finished. Whoops, I'm gonna have to get used to this camera, huh? Now this is a piece of glass that I sandblasted on the flash side with the silhouette of this vine pattern. I made the spines and the leaves with an engraving tool, but, and this might be hard to see if I can you see a little? Oh, I guess it works better with like this. You can see there's kind of a Greek key pattern. That's sandblasted on the non-flash side. So you can sandblast both sides if you want, but the non-flash side will appear to be just frosted. And this is that crazy glue sample. In this case, the glue was rotten. It was like years and years old, and it made these incredible swirlies. And the sponge. This is another example of working with the engraving tools as well. So there we go. All right, so here's my piece of glass, and to determine the flash side, I have figured that out already. And here's my contact paper and my X-Acto knife and my ceramic rib, my special eyeglasses for old people. I keep doing the power cord for the computer, which is getting the cat very excited. All right, so I put down the piece of glass that I want to cut, and I cut enough contact paper to go over the edges a little bit. And then I take the back off of it and stick it, whoa, sticky side up. And place the flash side down like that, and go all around the edges. You don't want any going over the sides. You know why? Because the sandblaster will latch onto that and pick up your resist, and it'll go flying all over everywhere. Now you want to smooth this down so there is no bubbles. And to do that, I turn the light table off, because what I want is reflected light. So the light table's off. And I'm going to pick up the stencil, pick up the stencil and take the ceramic rib and go from the middle to the edge, making sure there's no air bubbles in there at all. So you go out in the middle, smoothing it down so that there are no bubbles. That looks really good. Then you get your pattern, and you put this on top of the pattern. I'm going to turn the light table back on so that I can see through it. And I take a fine razor point or ultra fine point Sharpie, and I trace the pattern. You know what? I'm not going to trace the whole pattern, but I am going to just show you basically how that works, so that you get the idea. Now this is a piece for a stage blasted piece of work. So anything that is white will appear white. Anything that is black will be dark blue, and this will be light blue, the gray areas, right? Okay, so just continue to do this until you are all the way done. And then you can get rid of that and you can start cutting it out with your X-Acto knife. Now, because I'm a strange person, I truly enjoy this process. I could do it all day long. However, you might not enjoy this process. And on and on and on until it is actually all the way cut out. So then you reach a point where you have to determine what part you are going to remove first, second, and third, because this is stage blasting, right? So I'll just finish cutting out this one wing here. And in this case, I can refer to my drawing. So I'll just finish the wing so that you see that it looks like the drawing a little bit. There we go. And in the drawing, you can see that this section here, which is this section here, is white. So I pull up the stencil wherever there's a white area and see where I didn't cut. All right, there we go. And then this one's white, so pull that one up. And this one's white, and this one's white. And then it is ready to sandblast. So I have a whole video of sandblasting. Figuring out how to record sandblasting was a real challenge because this particular camera is attached to the laptop and I wanted to film it with my phone, but there is no tripod tall enough to show my screen. Anyway, I figured out a way and I have recorded it already. So now I am going to switch to that recording. It's about 7 minutes long and I'm going to talk over it. I will say this is the best way to demonstrate sandblasting, even better than demonstrating it to you in person. You know why? Because in person, we would all be wearing respirators. We would all be listening to the sound of the dust collector and the air compressor going off, and you would not be able to understand or see anything that I'm doing. So I'm actually really excited to show you the videotape of sandblasting, which I will talk over on screen share. All right, here we go.